thank you so much for being here on a very big week. You just heard my conversation with Secretary Rubio. We specifically started talking about the fact that President Trump initially said he wanted a ceasefire agreement. Now he wants a broader peace deal. Secretary Rubio defending that approach, basically saying the Russians wouldn't agree to a ceasefire. Do you think that it's the right strategy to now focus on that broader peace deal?
That meeting was a disaster. It was an embarrassment for the United States. It was a failure. Putin got everything he wanted. I mean, first of all, he wanted that photo op, right? He wanted to be absolved of his war crimes in front of the world. He was invited to the United States. War criminals are not normally invited to the United States of America. He is intentionally murdering civilians. He's kidnapping children. And now he got to stand next to the president of the United States, legitimized in the view of the world. Second, he didn't have to give up anything, nothing. Right? President Trump said he wanted a ceasefire. It appears the ceasefire wasn't even seriously discussed. And then third, there's no consequences. Trump said, if I don't get a ceasefire, Putin's going to pay a price. And then he walked out of that meeting saying, I didn't get a ceasefire, I didn't get a peace deal, and I'm not even considering sanctions. You heard Secretary Rubio downplay sanctions. And so Putin walks away with his photo op, with zero commitments made and zero consequences. What a great day for Russia.
What about the argument that you heard Secretary Rubio make, which is he said he doesn't think that sanctions would make a difference in terms of forcing a ceasefire agreement? Does he have a point? I mean, after all, we have seen President Putin continue this war, dropping bombs relentlessly, despite the fact that there have been all of these sanctions imposed against him.
So he is right that sanctions have not had any practical impact thus far. But that is in part because our sanctions are directly levied on Russia. And there's very limited economic relationship between the United States and Russia. These next sanctions that we're talking about, that Congress is considering authorizing, are actually secondary sanctions, sanctions that would make it hard for Russia to continue to do business with countries like China and India, who are essentially funding the war. So this next set of sanctions could be much more impactful. The problem is, in the Senate, the Republican leader won't even bring up a vote, a debate on this bill, because Donald Trump doesn't even want a discussion about these sanctions because he's so worried that it might upset his great friend Vladimir Putin. What is most impactful and what will be most impactful on this war are more weapons for Ukraine. And here's where Putin has the upper hand. So long as Trump is still opposed to continuing to arm Ukraine, Putin knows that it is just a matter of time before he can gain the advantage. So Putin walks away from the summit with no economic sanctions, with no sense that Trump is going to continue to send weapons to Ukraine, and essentially a green light to continue the war on his terms.
Let me ask you about this new reporting that we have that basically President Trump did in a call with European allies, with President Zelensky, say that the United States would be willing to enter into a NATO-like security agreement, not including U.S. troops, but that the U.S. would back European troops that were there. Is that enough?
Well, that is an essential element of a peace agreement because any commitment that Vladimir Putin makes to not invade Ukraine again isn't worth the paper that it's written on. He's made that commitment many times before. So, yes, there has to be a guarantee that if Putin were to enter Ukraine after a peace settlement, that there would be some force there, a U.S. force, a U.S. European force there to defend Ukraine. But there are also reports from that call that Trump is willing to give more territory to Russia than they even occupy today, which would be a stunning development. Again, another sense that Putin is just in charge of these negotiations.
Well, to that very point, if you talk to military experts, they say, look, the reality is Ukraine likely cannot win a prolonged war militarily. Senator, do you think, from a realistic standpoint, Ukraine will need to cede some of its territory in order to end this war, in order to stop the killing?
That question is up to the Ukrainian people and to President Zelensky. And if they want to enter into that negotiation, the United States should support them. The only way they would do that is if they had that security guarantee from the United States. So that has to be a conversation that is probably brokered by the United States, but is a direct conversation between Ukraine and Russia. And the only way that Ukraine would even consider that is a realistic threat that the war would continue and that the United States would continue to get Ukraine's back with additional weapons if those negotiations fell apart. As so long as Putin knows that the flow of weapons is about to end from the United States to Ukraine, there is zero incentive for Russia actually to come down and sit legitimately and realistically at the negotiating table with Ukraine.
President Trump was asked what his message will be to President Zelensky on Monday. He said to make a deal. What is your message to President Zelensky heading into these high-stake talks tomorrow?
Well, I mean, listen, I would love to tell him that there is still a bipartisan consensus to support Ukraine in the United States Senate. But as I mentioned to you, we actually have a very tough sanctions bill that gives the president the ability to levy these new sanctions against Russia. But the Senate leadership won't even bring it up for a vote. Why? Because in the Congress, the Republicans essentially work for President Trump. And if President Trump tells them that his number one priority is to keep Vladimir Putin happy, not to actually levy the kind of sanctions that would create a realistic negotiating table, Senate Republicans are going to listen. So this is a really dangerous moment because Senate Republicans, House Republicans are not willing to support Ukraine if Donald Trump won't give them the green light. And as you saw coming out of that summit, it seems that Trump's number one priority is just keeping his friend Vladimir Putin happy.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.